Okay, we are good to start.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I will call the General Committee meeting to order. Welcome to our virtual General Committee meeting to those watching online. Of course, due to the ongoing physical distancing measures, the order in council, councillors are not at City Hall, but are participating via video conference. Members of EMT and the senior leadership team are not visible, but are available to answer questions. I would like to remind everybody of the protocol that we received from the city clerk. Includes the following rules. If you are participating via video conference, a microphone should be muted unless the participant is speaking. But if you're participating via the online video conference, your webcam shall be turned on. So leave your cameras on, please. Any member of General Committee participating via online video conference or telephone, please announce if you're leaving prior to adjournment. You are also requested to turn off your camera if you have a conflict of interest. So that's the proper procedure there. If we lose anybody, we will hold on until we get you back. If after 15 minutes we're not able to reach the member, then the meeting resumes. Unfortunately, without you. We'll hope that that doesn't happen. Hasn't happened yet. And of course, now it will because I said it. The first item on our agenda tonight is the consent agenda. For the consent items, I will read out the title associated with the recommended motions from the staff reports and the items for discussion. As always, please hold if you wish to discuss the item further. If the item is not held, the motion printed on the agenda is deemed to be approved on consent. There will be no further discussion of the item this evening, and the recommendation will go forward to City Council for their consideration at our next meeting. Okay, staff reports tonight. First staff report is with regards to COVID-19 financial update, implications, and projections.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Harvey, thank you. The next staff report is with regards to our 2020 tax rates. No holds on that. It is approved on consent. The next staff report is regarding the Downtown Barrie Business Association levy. No holds. That is approved. The next item is with regards to the 2020 property tax clawback rates. No holds on that. It is approved. We have the 2019 Investment Management Annual Report. No holds there. It is approved. Staff report on ranked ballots.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Kungl. The next item is with regards to surplusing of Veterans Lane. No holds on that item. That is approved. We have one confidential item tonight. If somebody could hold that for discussion. Thanks, Councillor Morales. I saw your hand first. Thanks very much. That will be discussed later in camera. Okay, we have no information items on tonight's agenda and just that one item for discussion. So we had two items that were held for discussion at this meeting in the public session. And the first one was the COVID-19 financial update, implications, and projections. It was held by Councillor Harvey. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put the matter on the floor as printed, and I do have an amendment to put on the floor that the collection of fees associated with sign infractions for Barrie-based businesses be deferred until January 29th, 2021, and that the notice to owner be amended to reflect this change. And I can speak to that.
Okay, thank you very much. So the staff report is to be received for information. That's on the floor. Councillor Harvey's moving an amendment to defer collection of sign fees until the end of January. Go ahead, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've been reached out specifically by one company in my ward thus far that recently received a notice from the finance department in a fairly significant dollar value that if they had to pay it immediately on the time frame that's indicated on the form, it would cause them significant hardship in moving forward with their business. as I'm sure them and along with several other businesses have had to take on some significant debt to be able to maintain paying at least part, if not all, of their rents and such forth. So as a result, all I'm doing is asking that we defer the time frame that these payments are due, and to notify those companies that would fit within the parameters of being local Barrie businesses to do with these sign bylaws, to provide them notice of such deferral due dates.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Councillor Harvey, would your motion be to defer payments or to adjust payment? Based on what you discussed, it would just be to defer payment until a later date. I was thinking that maybe you were going a step forward to maybe waive payments, reduce payments, or work with the people that were billed. And if that was the case, maybe it would be retroactive to anybody who's gotten a fine after the emergency declaration. I think anybody who had gotten a fine because they didn't care before the emergency declaration, that's a different story. You know, some people might have outstanding fines from 8 months ago. But if your approach was to maybe be a little more compassionate for people who got caught in that March 15th, March 19th ongoing, I'd wonder how we could maybe come to a delicate balance between being compassionate but still kind of, you know, doing our jobs.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Exactly what you just discussed is actually one of the options that has been discussed with staff and senior management in regards to this, because of obviously the complexities involved and obviously looking at the magnitude of how many businesses were involved. So yes, I looked at everything from even potentially even waiving the fees in its entirety to where we ended up with this motion at this time. But I'm open to everything, because those are the options. We explored everything, and this was where we got to at this point. But again, I'd be interested to hear what everybody around the table's got to say when it comes to going down that road, and obviously staff when it comes to the financial implications and the viability of doing such a thing.
Okay, so I would be comfortable supporting it this week, and maybe Councillor Harvey, between now and next week at City Council, we can have those conversations with staff. And again, it's not about just waiving it and giving everyone a free pass, but firm but fair. If we can find something that's more middle ground, we could always amend it next week.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Morales. Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you. Before I ask a question, can I get Councillor Harvey to read that one more time?
Sure, Councillor Harvey, if you don't mind.
Sure. That the collection of fees associated with sign infractions for Barrie-based businesses be deferred until January 29th, 2021, and that the notice to the owner be amended to reflect this change.
Okay. What are these fines for signs? I'm just not clear on what the offense is here.
So I can jump in, Councillor Harvey, if you want, because the other, so Councillor Harvey and I had some conversation around this because we both received two complaints, one related to a South End business, one related to a Dunlop West business. These are for illegal placement of signs. So in some cases, you know, H-frame signs on the grass near the business or in other areas of the city, just as a form of advertising. In one case, it was actually on the property or on the boulevard in front of the business, just saying they're still open for takeout. And they were, you know, sort of handmade signs. I do understand, and staff can confirm, I think there were about 35 to 40 businesses, and I'm seeing a nod from the clerk, over the course of the last couple of months who did receive these notices and invoices, and they range in dollar amount from a few $100s to over $1,000. So they're quite significant.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jim Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I do appreciate the sentiment, and I appreciated both the comment from Councillor Morales and Deputy Mayor Ward. Somebody else might be asking the same question to themselves. So I'm going to ask, curious why it was pushed to 2021. I'm sure staff had talked about that when the motion was discussed. So just curious as to why. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey?
Through you, Your Worship. A few dates were discussed, and realistically, we couldn't push it off too long, and that seemed to be a reasonable time frame to be looking at. But again, it's one of those things always open to changing the date, whether it's extending it or whatever the case may be. It just happened to be the date that we felt was reasonable when we were coming up with this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Anyone else who wishes to speak to Councillor Harvey's amendment? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question on it. Those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. Everybody yes, and 2 thumbs up from Councillor Morales. So that is a unanimous on the amendment. On the main motion as amended, any further discussion of this item? Okay, I'll just make note for those watching. This is the update that we have received from our staff on the financial impacts of COVID on the city of Barrie, which are quite severe. I think as our staff have also recognized, and I know there's been a lot of interest, certainly that's come to my office about both service levels that we've had to reduce. The obvious ones are grass cutting and so forth that are probably obvious to our residents, but there are others that are obviously, or that are less obvious, I guess. The overall picture is that our senior staff have been able to reduce costs to offset our revenue hit to date, but only at the expense of laying off a very significant number of staff, which has resulted obviously in the reduced service to the public. You know, I think the live discussion that was going on last week at the federal level and the provincial level around financial relief for municipalities obviously directly affects us. You know, there have been wage subsidies for other sectors to keep people employed, to keep people working. There has been no help for the municipal sector. And so that advocacy has continued from every municipal official that's active on that front across the country. And FCM on our behalf continues to advocate. The latest announcement, of course, was the $14 billion in sort of block funding that is going to be provided to the province. Province says, but as the Premier indicated, that will not come close to covering the costs even for the Greater Toronto Area. So it's a live file, and we continue to advocate through the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus, LUM, and the FCM and AMO and everybody to try and improve those numbers that are in this staff report, because we recognize it's unsustainable. And if there is continued restrictions later into the year, the situation is only going to continue. So with that, I will call the question on the motion as amended. It's to receive the report with Councillor Harvey's amendment as action. Please indicate those in favor of the motion. Any opposed? None. That carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, the next item that was held was the staff report on the ranked ballot system. Councillor Kungl, you held the item.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to table an amendment, please.
Okay, so the item would go on the floor as amended, or at least as printed, and then you're going to amend it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
That the city clerk be requested to report back to General Committee in September 2020 to provide additional information concerning ranked ballots, including reporting back as to the voting services company, Simply Voting, used by the city of Barrie, as to if it can facilitate a ranked ballot election and if there is any added expense to do so, and to provide a more fulsome report that includes social and democratic considerations related to changing the ballot type. So this would be in addition to the financial and technical aspects that have been provided in the staff report, and look to address discrepancies noted in a review of the staff report by Engage Barrie.
Okay, so the amendment, I don't think I have the text.
Do you want me to send it to you?
That would be helpful. Madam Clerk, have you got the text of the amendment there? Okay, so the clerk's got it. That's okay, Councillor Kungle, but I'm going to have to rely on you to repeat it if members of General Committee need it again. Why don't you go ahead and speak to it, though?
Sure. I'm not sure if full council saw a document that came in, I believe today, shortly in advance of council, but it did raise for me a lot of great information that put into question whether or not, well, for me, I believe that there's an opportunity to kind of validate some of the information in the staff report and then further add to it. So I know we want to criticize or come across as criticizing the staff report, but I would like to have that taken back. There's some pretty good questions and areas of consideration that I think need to be validated, that are discrepancies between what is being seen publicly to come through the staff report and actually be out in public information, public facing information with respect to ranked ballots. So as we do have some time, I would like to hopefully have a more robust staff report come back in September of this year for consideration and discussion.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Kungle. On the amendment, Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Just a question. Who is Access Barrie? Or Engage Barrie, sorry. Who is Engage Barrie? I did see the letter, but it didn't say like who is part of that.
So I don't for formal naming, but I know it is a group of interested stakeholders that are interested in different types of options around electoral reform or democratic process. So when they saw that, I imagine that they looked at a review of the staff report against information to either validate. And so they've had more questions, I think, that raised questions for me about discrepancies or misinformation with respects to some of the content. So if you hadn't had a chance to read it, some examples were in that report, actually quoting a resource from our a representative from, I'm going to name it here, Simply Voting, indicating that it actually can be used to facilitate ranked ballot election. I believe in the staff report that was indicated as it's not possible. I think there was other reference to Kingston and Cambridge proceeding with this. And one of those where I believe it was Cambridge might have been identified as actually not proceeding, where it actually is proceeding to look at ranked ballot voting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did read it. It was,
okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, Councillor Morales, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I was just going to ask, I guess, Councillor Kungle is not, I don't know if the question is appropriate to you about who is Engaged Barrie in the sense of, you know, you're not with them, but if you, I guess it maybe staff know if I can get some clarification about Engaged Barrie. Councillor Kungle, if you're able to answer, feel free to answer. But I'm just kind of following. The reason I guess I'm asking you is because Councillor Natalie Harris asked you. Is there a reason why we're getting information again? The classic Monday email request to delay. Let's call it the white elephant. Engaged Barrie has been pushing for ranked balloting for months. There's been people other than Engaged Barrie that have been pushing for it for years. So it's just it is a very important issue to a lot of people and those that believe in it. I'm a little bit unsure as to why the last minute Monday push for an issue that people have been either passionately following for months or for years, other than thinking that they weren't going to get the outcome they wanted. So I don't know. Again, if you personally have insight, that's great. Or if any members of council have insight, I don't want to, you're not speaking on their behalf. And we got the letter, so we don't have any more additional information, but I'm just kind of curious as to why a Monday letter, why the delay, if this is something that they've been, at least publicly advocating for and clearly knowledgeable on for months, if not years.
Well,
Councillor Kungle.
for you, Mayor Lee, and to Councillor Morales. So I won't speak for Engaged Barrie. I think we all got it at the same time. I did look at this around that 4-page resource was in direct response to the staff report. So I would assume that is coming in a time when someone is doing some due diligence around looking at information and trying to compare it to another knowledge base. So I don't think it's a criticism, but it did raise questions for me, and I don't see the harm in holding off a decision unless council's prepared to make a decision until September. And so unless council is satisfied with the content in the staff report against questions raised that I'm seeing discrepancy on, I'd love to get a more fulsome report.
Thank you, Councillor Congo. That was a really democratic answer. My one final question is on the democracy part of your amendment. You said the social and democratic implications or something. Could you just elaborate on? I'm not familiar with the wording, and if you could give me like an example or two, because I'm satisfied with the staff report from the city of Barrie. However, I was curious about that section of your amendment.
Sure. So that was a point I'm hoping to get more information on and asking staff to bring that back. So in the conversation that was referenced, that the staff report did highlight a lot of technical and financial considerations, but I think they're identifying that there's other considerations as to the democratic process that a ranked ballot would be perceived to present, and maybe putting the pros and cons of that consideration into a more fulsome report. So adding some more levels of a bit of I think a fuller context of consideration to say it's not just a financial, it's just not a technical application, but what does ranked ballot provide from engaging residents, and what I'm reading, and I'm still learning about this, is that perhaps it's seen by some to be a process that allows more diversity, that actually means everyone's vote or voice counts. And there's some examples about how ranked ballot actually moves through an elimination process and then carries a vote forward for your second or third choice.
So in your opinion, obviously, if you're moving that, at least that section of an amendment, you don't think that the city staff report covers that, the mythology and the spin-off effects, it doesn't cover it enough to your satisfaction, which is okay. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
If you clearly you want like a more extensive look into that, or are you just wanting a different lens on that?
I'm wanting them to add those considerations to the report, and in addition to that, it looked like there was some misunderstanding, or the way in which the staff report was written alluded to the current voting system as not supporting, from the technological side, ranked ballot. I'm seeing some evidence that is possible. I don't know if that means that it would come at a greater cost for us to leverage that functionality of the current technology we've invested in. So I think there are parameters there that seem to be readily available. We've been pointed to some resources. I think a validation would be great, or added context would be helpful before we make a decision about this, considering we do have some time.
Okay, perfect. I'll give the floor back to the mayor, but I really appreciate your very clear clarifications. I appreciate it, Councillor Congo.
Sorry, folks, classic Zoom mistake. Councillor Congo, thank you. Councillor Morales, thank you. Councillor Rietma, I have you next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just have a question of staff. Their request is that a more fulsome report come back in September. Is that a reasonable time frame given what we're up to at this point?
I'll put that to the clerk. Ms. Cook.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma, yes, September would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Others who wish to comment on the proposed amendment? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just sitting back waiting to see what my colleagues had to say on this one, because I was the original mover of this motion to even obtain the staff report. And obviously it came back citing some issues with previous process and stuff. And to their credit, like, I mean, I find it's a fairly fulsome report. I don't know what more one would expect, other than obviously there's one piece that they're obviously Councillor Congo's looking for to be elaborated a little bit more to see if that outweighs some of the other cons that are cited within this report. But I think it's quite clear, and we've seen it firsthand in leadership races where the results are delayed by upwards of 24 hours. Same thing happened in London in the last municipal election. And then also too, obviously, it appears that there's a significant cost in doing this. And the other thing is, I am actually very familiar with Simply Voting, another organization that I'm with in the past few years has actually used Simply Voting. They are solely an online ballot service. So that would eliminate any of the face-to-face ability for voters to actually vote in person. Everything is done online, and I've gone through their site, and that's why my head was down as people were talking, because I was doing further online searches to see if some of their product has changed, but it's definitely everything online is showing that it's just solely an online service. And I'm not so sure if that's the direction we want to go to, that we're only limiting ourselves to something that's online and limiting that in-person voting, because especially when we look at our seniors population, now you're basically shutting out seniors, because I know when it came to other elections that I was assisting with, I would get several calls from seniors who were having a difficulty trying to cast their ballot because it was online. So as a result, I'm not going to be in favor of this amended motion, and I will accept the staff report as is. And I think too, obviously it'll give us some more time to maybe divulge what's contained within the report. And obviously too, in the report, it even explains too, there's no rush in making any rash decisions here, because it indicates that we have a May 1st, 2021 cutoff before we need to make any decisions if this is the route that we plan on going anyway.
Okay, so you make an important point, Councillor Harvey, and let's get some clarification on this. So, Madam Clerk, I know the staff report was only to be received for information. Was it staff's intention that if the city proceeded with ranked ballots, it would be online voting only, or would there still be in-person voting?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, for the question. The thought is to do the same method of voting that we did for the Ward 3 by-election, which would be online and telephone voting. So that would be remove the in-person component. However, we would do the same format as we did for the Ward 3 by-election, and we would have in-person voter assistance centers. So if somebody had difficulties voting at home, they could come to one of the voter assistance centers, and election staff would be able to help them and walk them through the ballot, similar to an in-person voting experience.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Jim Harris, I had you next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I have had some interest actually now on both sides of this item, received a very engaged group in Ward 8 as always. One of my questions, and I think we've been criticized sometimes in the past for referring items that look like they may not go a certain way to get more information. And information is always good, and I've done some homework and looked at some research data and some studies, academic studies on this topic. So, I mean, I think that's part of our responsibility when we get these to do our homework. And I respect also that our city clerk, who is our expert in elections, has done this homework as well and prepared a report. I also have noticed some discrepancies, what people claim and what our clerk, who is, I would fully respect, is unbiased, trying to get the best information to us to make a decision on this item, which was requested some time ago by Councillor Harvey. So maybe if it's fair through you, Mayor Lehman, to our city clerk, how would having more time to review what you already have reviewed impact what you've already assessed based on the one municipality in Ontario that's used this system and the challenges and the understanding that you have with intimately utilizing our current recording voting system that we use?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris. We would, just trying to think about this. So with the current online voting platform that we used for the Ward 3 by-election, we may not be using the same service provider in 2022 because we would likely have to go out for a RFP process because we only secured them for the 2020 by-election. There are other internet service providers out in the market, so we probably would have to do a proper procurement process. The reason we secured Simply Voting, we did that as a sole source procurement, was because of the timelines between the by-election, the call for the by-election, and actually having to conduct the by-election.
Great. Thank you. So just as a follow-up, would the extra time make any impact on the assessments you made in reviewing the outcomes of the ranked ballot experience in Ontario?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Jim Harris, no, it would not. It may provide us time for the city, like if the other two cities of Kingston and Cambridge decide to do their public consultation in the fall, if that's the route that they're taking, we may be able to see the results of their public consultation. I reviewed their websites and it did not look like Cambridge was proceeding. But they may have updated their website since I did the staff report. But I would say based on London's experience and the reduction in voter turnout and the confusion to voters, that would probably be something that we would probably, I couldn't probably provide much more additional information on that.
Okay, thank you. And in the Cambridge report, pardon me, in the London report that you mentioned, they talked about reduced voter turnout, and I've seen some other discrepancies around. I've read that it did increase negative campaigning, which of course, hopefully we all are concerned about, and that it actually didn't reduce strategic voting, that even mayor candidates actually told people not to rank other candidates. That was part of the campaigning. Are those claims accurate? Did you receive that in your determination? So that's through the clerk, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris. I based that information on news articles that we received, that I reviewed from the City of London from their 2018 municipal election. Staff and clerk's offices don't generally comment on the conduct of candidates per se, because that's something that we're not in charge of, except for maybe like placements of signs or anything like that. But content of campaign material, unless it's not permitted in the Municipal Elections Act, we generally do not get involved with that.
Thank you. I mean, this is a really important item, so I thank you. When we start talking about changing how we do elections, it's really key. Maybe just one further question, I'll open and give it back to my colleagues. In the Kingston and Cambridge side, as the next two who are considering going to ranked ballot Ontario, how did they get to that decision? Did they decide as a council, or did they use a public referendum to allow the electorate to weigh in on this and change?
Through Mayor Lehman to Councillor Harris, they both put a question on the 2018 municipal elections ballot.
Thank you very much. Without maybe a finalized say, that I think an item of this magnitude, I think, really requires, given that it's meant to really engage people in the election process, and hopefully what we're seeing in our world today is a more engaged citizenry. And I think that would be my preferred method, is to put this to our citizens. We are all citizens, and I think that would be my approach, rather than deferring it down the road. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Next, I have Councillor Elwin.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I do support the amendment, and I think it's important that we really focus in on what this amendment is asking for. This amendment is asking for staff to provide us some more information, looking at the report that we received from this group. This group has cited sources in the report that they drafted. And I think we owe it to the public to at least have an open and honest conversation about all of the issues at hand, especially since it is, like Councillor Jim Harris said, it is such an important and major decision that we would be making. So I would feel a lot more comfortable if we had, I mean, maybe these claims made in this report aren't true, but I would rather have our staff look into it so that we can make a proper decision. I think it is a consideration that we need to make. Do we need a referendum on such an issue? And I would like to remind council that if we just receive the report tonight, that's not the direction that we're giving staff. We would need to provide that specific direction. So I hope there would be an amendment to that effect. And I believe that if we did still want to proceed with a referendum after getting all the information, then we could do that in September. We could provide that direction in September. So it doesn't hurt to have all the information at our fingertips. So I would ask sincerely that council take a look at this and direct our staff to fill out the report a little bit more. And if it comes back with the same result, then we can make the decision then. And we've been told by our clerk that it is reasonable to have a report back in September. So I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Councillor Ripma, did I see your hand again?
You did. I guess I'm very much in favor of anything that helps to engage the public in our process. I'm not sure that ranked balloting is going to do that on its own. The experience in London, at least, doesn't support that. At the same time, our clerk is telling us that it's going to cost us another $220,000 to do this. We've got a lot of other places to spend $220,000 at this point. And I think really one of my concerns is just doing this as a city of Barrie. I would far prefer that every city, all municipal elections, be done by way of a ranked ballot or some other process. And that direction would come from the province, simply because we know there's going to be a lot of confusion. We know that we have to do a lot of educating. And it just seems to make a whole lot more sense for us to do this all together rather than one off at a time. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Councillor Ripma. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm of two minds of this. One is that, I mean, as the staff report makes clear, this staff has answered the questions they're required to answer: the cost of the municipality, the availability of technology, and the impact of the proposed bylaw on the administration. They've answered those questions. I think a lot of the things that we're looking for now are things that we can, as individual councillors, can do our own research. We can look them up, which I have been doing. On the other hand, I think more time for me to do more research. I mean, even on the weekend, I got a lot of information, which I've read, and there's a lot more out there. And I don't think it'll hurt to give us more time to do some research. And I guess the other thing is, before we ever implemented this, if we ever decided to do it, we'd have to hold a public meeting. And this is a terrible time to hold a public meeting. Maybe by the fall, circumstances will be better. We can plan a public meeting. I know we can hold a Zoom meeting. That is not, in my mind, the kind of meeting we should be doing. We should be holding a public forum where we can actually get people to show up and give us their comments. So for that reason, I'll support delaying this until at least in September. We'll see what the situation's like in December or in September. It'll give us a few more months to do some research on our own. Thanks.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Anyone else wish to speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll just provide a couple of comments before I call the question on the amendment. I'm actually with Councillor Jim Harris on this one. I strongly feel that the system you use to elect people is a question for the people, not for council. And in Kingston and Cambridge, they came to the same conclusion. And I think if there's ever been an issue to put on a referendum ballot that's appropriate to ask the people of Barrie to decide, it's how they elect their representatives. So I would be with Councillor Harris on that one, regardless of how we move forward from this report. On the amendment that is on the floor, you know, I'm going to support the amendment. I think if I'm paraphrasing correctly, Councillor Kungl, the report answered the question of how, but it didn't answer the question of why. And, you know, why is this a good idea or why is this a bad idea? It may have answered that from a functional point of view, but I think when you talk about the democratic considerations and we're talking about something as significant as electoral reform, there's this is what the system, this is the impact of the system where it's been used more broadly. This is the impact of the system where it isn't. And, you know, to be quite fair to the report, that it provides a good summary of what happened in London. And let's be honest, what the London experience did not demonstrate the benefits of ranked balloting that many proponents had hoped to see. But I'm not sure that on the basis of one election in one city, with a number of other municipalities proceeding and with a very broad range of other experience, I would note across North America, there couldn't be more information that council receives prior to deciding whether or not to put it on the ballot. But all of this to me should have the same end game, which is that the people of Barrie should decide how they elect the representatives of the people of Barrie. You know, regardless of what proceeds with this amendment, I would hope that that's where we would end up. So I'll support the amendment that's on the floor, which is just to refresh us, Councillor Kungl. You're looking for more information on the social and democratic aspects of the decision, and the report back was by September.
Yes, by September 2020. And the second part was really just validating that there's no discrepancies. There are pieces there that called to question that made me, and I can do my own due diligence, but if there are things at hand or if there's any, I'll leave it to the clerk's discretion to identify if there's anything there by which needs to be further clarified. That would be helpful, but I no means want this to be a make work effort. But there were good questions raised, and I think to your point, Mayor Lehman, getting to the deeper rooter question, I just want to make sure that should we motion in the future to put this on the ballot as part of a referendum, that we're well informed and we can do some good engagement through council, but also with our documentation as to the value and purpose and benefit to choosing to do so or not.
Fair enough. Okay, Deputy Mayor Ward.
I wonder if Councillor Kungl, we could friendly amendment to actually include the fact that to have staff report back on a possible referendum, what it would involve. So we'd have that information in September.
Lovely. I would be open to that.
Okay. So if we could do that, just have the staff report also include information on what would be involved in a referendum. Thanks.
Okay, I see the clerk nodding that that friendly could be accommodated in the report. Councillor Gary Harvey.
Just a quick question to the clerk, because if I read the report correctly, I believe it does address the guidelines around a referendum and placing the question on the ballot. So I'm not quite sure why we're sending something that seems to be quite clear that the question can very easily be added to the ballot for the following election, as long as it's done, I believe off the top of my head, by May 1st, we make a decision, and then as long as we have 50% of the voter turnout, it would be a binding referendum. However, if you have under 50%, then it wouldn't be a binding referendum. However, obviously, the next council could use that as assistance and direction. So, like, I guess my questions to the clerk, like, is there really any more information that you could obtain when it comes to the referendum that's been just spoken of?
Through Mayor Lehman to Councillor Harvey, I assumed that council or general committee is looking for more what it would look like for the city of Barrie to conduct a referendum, not just like what's detailed in the Municipal Act, more what it would cost to add another, maybe the cost in comparison to adding a question to the ballot as opposed to maybe doing a full out ranked ballot election. So there is probably a little bit of further information I could provide just to give that detail, but I wouldn't have to walk through all the steps because I've done that in this report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Harvey. Any other comments on the amendment before I call the question? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. Those in favor of the amendment, please indicate with your signs. Councillor Harvey, that's a no. Sorry, please continue to hold up your signs. So if I'm counting correctly, that is a 5-5. Okay, sorry, bear with me just a moment here, members of council. Okay, I was about to say, sorry, can you please, everybody indicate again? I recognize one member doesn't have their signs, but some of those were a little hard to see. Everybody, if you can indicate again.
Point of process, Mayor Lehman, I checked with the city clerk earlier today and she said I am able to indicate to the through the chat feature as well to her in writing.
Yeah, we'll count your vote, Councillor Morales. I couldn't see everybody's yeses or nos very clearly. I'm in favor of this, so it carries 6-5. So the amendment is carried. On the motion as amended, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question on the motion as amended. Those in favor, please indicate. Okay, opposed, continue to be opposed is 2. So that carries by 9-2 vote as amended. Okay, thank you, members of General Committee. The remaining matter that was held is for the confidential session, which we will do after the completion of the public agenda, which brings us to inquiries of staff. Deputy Mayor Ward, and inquiries of staff.
I do have one, and sorry I didn't give staff a heads up on it, but I'm curious. A week ago, we got a memo about how some staff were being brought back to help with parks maintenance, both natural parks and athletic fields. I just wanted to get an update on what's happening with that from staff.
Thank you. Mr. Prost, do you wish to answer that or punt? Sorry, Mr. Prost, I think you may still be on mute too. There we go.
Sorry, Mayor Lehman, my screen went fuzzy, the joys of technology. Thank you for the question through you to Deputy Mayor Ward. I think Ms. Miller can give the details on it, but the recruitment of the staff returning to work was underway. I think she would have the exact date of that, but that would bring our parks team back up to, I think, just around 50% staffing.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, to Deputy Mayor Ward. That's correct. We are in the process of recalling staff. Some are starting this week, and we anticipate by next Monday, we will be back up to 50% of our, approximately 50% of our seasonal staffing level. And the mowing and other amenity opening operations are our current priority.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Councillor McCann, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Sorry, I have to apologize too to Andrea Miller. I didn't do a follow-up. Andrea, last week we had discussion on pedestrian traffic on the Tiffin boat launch down to further down Lakeshore. Did you get back any numbers on the pedestrian traffic?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, I'm expecting tomorrow to have the counts from this past weekend, and then I'll be able to complete our analysis comparing what was my concern with a potential overcount from previous reporting. So if you can give me until tomorrow, I'd be happy to send an email around to council once I have those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow is great. Maybe just 2 follow-up questions. I noticed on the bike path today that you actually had some pedestrian traffic monitoring systems on the actual North Trail. What are you looking to gather from that information?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, we do move the counter boxes to different locations to get a sense for usage at different locations and different areas of the city. So we're simply counting at the North Shore Trail at this point as well.
We did enjoy reading, "This is not a camera." That probably helps out with the vandalism, I'm sure. Just, I guess, a follow-up with the Lakeshore. I have had another councillor member reach out to me, and just seeing the backup of traffic getting onto Bradford Street and the lack of traffic. So if you do find that the pedestrian traffic is not abundant, will you be reversing the decision? I guess, will the mayor be reversing the decision to bring that back to traffic? And how fast would that be?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, we made a commitment to carry out this pilot and report back. So my expectation is we will report back and council can give us direction in terms of what you would like to do.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor McCann. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I had a question for Mr. Ferrari. He's on, right? Yes. So hard when we don't see him there. We had chatted a little bit about the questions that are ample right now with the speed pads that are being placed. If you could maybe share a little bit about the conversation that we had about looking into permanent speed pads and speed bumps and what the status is on that for the city.
Mr. Ferrari.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Natalie Harris. Obviously, this is not Mr. Ferrari. I don't believe that Mr. Ferrari is on the call. We only have senior leadership on when there is an item on the agenda for them. So I don't believe that he is there, but I will certainly take your question away and I will provide you with an answer tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gary Harvey.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, just a follow-up to that same question from Councillor Harris when it comes to the speed cushions, because I've had some inquiries as to the time frame of installation and stuff, and I know everything's been delayed by contractors and such forth when it comes to the COVID issue. So it'd be interesting just to see what kind of time frame we're looking at in having these installed, because obviously if it's going to happen in the middle of summer, it's almost pointless even putting them out.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey. I think as I indicated last week, we have finished all of the locates and the contractor has actually started or is starting this week the installation of the approved temporary speed cushions. So that work is definitely underway and I will provide you with an update about when we expect to have that work completed, in addition to Councillor Harris's question about the permanent speed cushion program.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Any other inquiries of staff? Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Mr. Prowse, do you know roughly how many fines under the Emergency Act have been issued out? Not only the quantitative number of the fines, but the qualitative in terms of the amount that is owed, roughly?
Mr. Prowse.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Through you to Councillor Morales. Councillor Morales, no, I don't know the total sum. You're talking dollars?
Yep.
No, I don't believe we have pulled that data. We do provide members of council. I think there was a memo provided late today that includes an update on the enforcement, but that doesn't include the dollar value. I'd be happy to get that and circulate that to members of council if you like.
Okay, and just the reason I bring it up is I'm of the personal opinion that we collectively, we no longer have the moral authority to be enforcing fines. Let's be frank. And if we don't have the moral authority, I think it undermines our legal authority to be enforcing these fines, collecting these fines. So as Ontario opens up again for business, as people start gathering again, I would like to see some sort of kind of, and this thought kind of stemmed from Councillor Harvey's earlier motion, kind of start to looking at that because, you know, again, I don't think we have the moral authority. So I guess a question to the clerk is if somebody, you know, got a social distancing ticket or a business got some sort of, you know, you didn't do takeout the right way or something like that. Do those people have the ability to challenge the ticket to the Finance and Corporate Services Committee, Ms. Cook, or what entity does a challenge go to?
Ms. Cook, inquiry.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. The fines that we've been charging have been actually, most of them have been under the Parks bylaw. So those fines are dealt with through the POA courts. And they are they're about, I think they're $300 tickets, but I could be wrong on that one. So those are the tickets that we've been laying. As the restrictions also have been being lifted, we've been removing the areas that we're enforcing. We are still educating people on the gathering of 5. Now it will be 10 as of the weekend. And we also continue to educate on the social distancing because those measures are still in place and are very important in the fight against COVID.
Ms. Cook, so if somebody gets a social distancing ticket and they kind of find it hypocritical that they got one and not someone else, and they, to the point where it undermines the enforcement, are they going to the provincial court and appealing that, providing that information? Because that's a little bit bureaucratic. Shouldn't it be the municipality enforcing it? And because the municipality and their officers are the one that makes the call saying, yes, issue that ticket, no, issue that ticket. So I don't know why we're going through the provincial system because they don't have that intimate experience. I think it'd be more appropriate if they were going through Finance and Corporate Services Committee or some sort of city clerk's office system.
Ms. Cook.
I will have to review the information from the province specifically related to the provincial fines, but the fines that we have been laying currently have been under our parks bylaw, and those tickets go to the POA courts and are dealt with through our own POA courts.
Okay, perfect, Ms. Cook. If you could get me that information, that'd be great. I'd love to see anybody wanting to challenge social distancing tickets at Finance and Corporate Services.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Morales. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. This question is actually directed for Councillor Morales.
Okay, it is inquiries of staff, but go ahead, Councillor McCann. Go ahead.
I've been working with you, Councillor Morales, for 5 years, and I usually track really well with you. I need a deeper explanation why we don't have a moral authority, if you don't mind.
So I think members of council, we're pushing the Municipal Act here considerably. If a member of council wishes to raise the enforcement method or process for any city bylaw, you are of course welcome to do that. This is a matter, though, that we have to tell the public we're going to be talking about by law. The purpose of inquiries is to allow for the information to be received, but not to start into a debate about new policy. We can't do that. That's actually contrary to the Act. So it's difficult for me to rule that in order, Councillor McCann, because I'm intrigued by Councillor Morales' statement too, but we're required under the Act to only speak to items that are on the agenda when it comes to setting policy. If we start to go back and forth among members of council to debate a change in policy or enforcement or whatever that would be, we are running contrary to the Act. So if you'll bear with me just a moment, members of council, I'm just going to consult with the clerk here around my interpretation there, because I recognize the interest in talking about this, but bear with me a moment if you would. Madam Clerk, when it comes to, and I'm going to keep the microphone running here so it's not offline. When it comes to matters like the enforcement of a bylaw, the matter that Councillor Morales has raised, where do we have to draw the line in terms of discussion among members of council?
I would say, sorry, to you, Mayor Lehman, I would say that we probably should cease the discussion where it is right now, because generally members of council shouldn't get involved in POA or legal matters, because because Councillor Morales was referring to what happens with dealing with charges, and that's really not under the purview of members of council.
Okay, yeah, I understand that additional concern. Councillor McCann, you still have the floor, but I think based on that advice from the clerk, it's probably a discussion that if councillors wish to have, you could consult with the clerk as to how best to bring that forward to general committee in the future.
Quick point of order. It's not, I don't think Councillor McCann's question to me, it's a process of new policy. I think it's a question of clarification based on my question of clarification of existing policy. I'm not trying to enact new policy. I got clarity that it's one entity handling and not the other, but I don't think this discussion would be a discussion about new policy. Like, it's on existing policy, just the way we asked, how is snow enforcement going? How's plowing? We're not proposing new ones. So I think the question should be ruled, like, I think we're having a discussion about existing policy.
So I guess 2 points, and I'll go back to the clerk. Thanks, Councillor Morales. And Mr. Prowse is indicating as well. So I think the clerk has raised the second issue, which is it's actually contrary to the code of conduct for councillors to be directing enforcement. Questions around how enforcement is going, absolutely. The specifics of how and who is enforced, that's the issue that the clerk is nodding at me right now is not appropriate. I think the other issue from a process point of view, Councillor Morales, that I'm raising is it's absolutely legit for us as a council to have a discussion around what the bylaw should be, but not how it's enforced, because we as council set bylaws, set laws, and our staff are to enforce them. But I will go to I'll go to Mr. Prowse now, who indicated. Mr. Prowse.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I just wanted to provide an update. I was able to pull the information Councillor Morales asked for, at least by way of quantity, while council was deliberating. So I thought I would share that. So since the March 16th, we have investigated just under 8,000 incidents. And we have, in all cases, been able to get resolution without charges as it relates to 99.79% of the time. And if I do my monkey math, I think that means over just approximately 3 months, there was about 12 or 15 charges laid. So almost 8,000 incidents and 99.79% of the time, it was resolved without a ticket or charge. And I'd be happy to provide the quantum of the dollars that involves, but it certainly would not be significant.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Prowse. Councillor McCann, Councillor Morales, unfortunately, I mean, the clerk has been fairly clear here in whether the discussion is appropriate. Her belief is it's not, so I would take her advice and at this point rule that question out of order, Councillor McCann. I do appreciate the desire to talk about it and the importance of the issue, and I would welcome you bringing it forward as an agenda item, but I would suggest strongly speaking with the clerk, given the nature of the issue and what is within council's purview and what isn't.
Well, thank you. Put it so strongly. I'll withdraw.
Thank you, Councillor McCann. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Are you staff? Am I allowed to ask you a question?
Well, if it's a question of information that I can provide, according to the rules, I'm happy to provide information. If not, I'll pass it to a staff member who hopefully can.
Okay, great. My question is, I guess, related to enforcement as well. I was overwhelmed with messages about concern to do with enforcement after the gathering at Meridian Place. And, you know, regardless of the cause that I support why the gathering occurred, people were, you know, upset that maybe there wasn't enforcement. And what can you share, I think, with the public to kind of answer those questions that I really didn't know how to answer?
Sure. So thank you. And again, I don't direct enforcement, so I will actually pass those along to, I'll pass that question to Mr. Prowse or Ms. McAlpine with regards to the enforcement practice from the city around the gatherings. It's probably also an appropriate question for the Barrie Police, but I'll ask Ms. McAlpine to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm pleased to respond. Certainly, we are aware of the concerns that were raised. With a single or two officers available, they certainly, from a safety perspective, would not have been able to address the gathering complaints. Barrie Police was present to ensure the safety of the individuals who participated and those in the area. Certainly, from the individuals that I saw, many of them were wearing face coverings and were attempting to distance themselves, but given the number of people, that wasn't necessarily possible. But from a safety perspective for the enforcement, municipal law enforcement staff, given that there's only one or two in, it wouldn't have been safe for them to attempt to address that.
Thank you. Can I just have a quick follow-up?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. Absolutely, that is very reasonable, for sure. I was just wondering, do you have information? It was a circumstance that, you know, we needed to manage in a different way than we were prepared to, obviously, to do with the health unit. But are you aware of any other enforcement tickets that were given out even anywhere in Barrie to do with social distancing on the days of the protests? And if so, would it be possible to maybe just waive those ones just because of the whole, it was a difficult day to manage it. And I think that would be fair to make it a day, that the 2 days of the protest, that we wouldn't have any tickets for social distancing because everybody was just trying to do their best that day.
So Councillor Harris, I'll ask staff to answer the first part of your question because that's totally legit, asking how many tickets were issued on the day. We cannot direct staff to waive tickets that is crossing the line into directing enforcement. Same as a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. Council cannot do that except by changing the bylaw. This is why I was in reference to Councillor Morales and Councillor McCann's discussion. Entirely legit to have that discussion, changing the bylaw or the emergency order around this table. But number one, it needs to be on the agenda. And number two, it can't be about waiving specific tickets. You got to change the law, not the specific ones. So, but I will ask Ms. McAlpine to answer the first part of your question, which was how many tickets were issued for distancing on, I think it was Thursday and Saturday, if you're referring to the 2 days that we saw the gatherings. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I can advise that municipal law enforcement did not issue any tickets on either Thursday or Saturday. I cannot speak to whether or not Barrie Police issued any tickets, but city municipal law enforcement officers did not issue tickets to anyone. It was all education and warnings.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I understand the second part of my question after it kind of came out of my mouth. So
yeah,
thank you.
Totally. And by the way, all members of council on this, totally legitimate question, concern. I certainly received many, many messages about that as well. It's just something, because it's an enforcement issue, politicians never direct how the police enforce the law or intervene in specific cases, and that goes right down to parking tickets, but we make the law. And even during a time of emergency, when I have had to use the emergency authority, members of council, you are absolutely within your rights to put a matter on the agenda and for us to talk about that, or to approach me with those concerns. So thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Other inquiries, Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman, and I appreciate the clarity on the process and the code. That's important with how I'm going to phrase my question. To staff, would it be possible for council to change the policy retroactively, so any person, any of those 15, 2 or 3 dozen who haven't paid their tickets yet aren't required to? And before you answer that question, I'm going to provide this commentary because it's important for the context. I think the reality is a lot of the comments we're getting, I've had residents say, can we gather for my mother's, like elderly mother, there might not be another Mother's Day, Mother's Day celebration. And the answer that I got from Ms. Bantang, the answer that I relayed was, I'm sorry, just no more than 5 people outside a household. One household counts as one, and as far as I know, the residents respected the situation in that instance. I think of a situation where a lot of people have not seen their elderly parents, their loved ones for months at a time. My grandmother passed away during COVID in Colombia, but had she been here in Barrie, family wouldn't have been able to gather in more than 5. There's lots of people have made lots of sacrifices, and those are important. And the rally was important. So right clearly away, I want to indicate that the issue that the rally was important, but it's the double standard. It's the hypocrisy. This is not, my comments are not about the rally right now. My comments are about, at that point, as the enforcers, City of Barrie entity, I believe that we kind of lost that moral authority. And I don't want this discussion to be about, oh, well, you're criticizing the rally, or people who are saying that the rally shouldn't have happened, are anti-rally. I think there are a lot of people who actually can support, you are able to support the issue of systemic racism, and you're able to also address the fact that somebody who's sacrificed and hasn't seen their loved ones for 4 months feel a little bit sour. I think those things are consistent. So my question to staff is, could council move some sort of policy that would retroactively waive those? And again, we're talking about 15 tickets or so. And this discussion is not about the narrative that we're having around the globe, but it's just about how we consistently show people do as we do, not just do as we say.
So I think that's a question for either Madam Clerk or Ms. McAlpine. Ms. McAlpine, do you want to take the first crack at whether council can retroactively make decisions around enforcement of bylaws?
Mayor Lehman, thank you for the question. The 15 charges that have been laid were all laid through the Provincial Offences Act. They have been filed with the courts. It isn't possible now for staff to withdraw those. They are in the hands of the court, and a person would exercise the options that are available on their ticket to dispute it should they wish.
So Ms. McAlpine, theoretically, a person wishing to dispute their ticket, going through the process that is not within our purview, could dispute the ticket and show the inconsistencies in enforcement between their instance and other instances of the Barrie, and it would then be up to a judge to take that into consideration.
Ms. McAlpine.
Mayor Lehman, through you to Councillor Morales, it would be up to the member of the Justice of the Peace who would be addressing the Provincial Offences Act charge to determine whether or not the evidence was something that they found compelling.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarity.
Okay, thank you, members of General Committee. Are there other inquiries of staff? Okay, seeing none. Announcements, Deputy Mayor Ward. None. Councillor Thompson.
Through you, Mayor Lehman. Just an announcement. Not everybody knows that the committees are unable to meet, and I just wanted to highlight that the Barrie Public Art Committee is still working on the Bob Hunter Memorial. It's 60% construction completed, and they're only $3,500 away from raising the $50,000 to match the Hunter family donation. So they've been working tirelessly in these conditions, and I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed, and they're looking at construction in September. So kind of feel good thing.
It's great, Councillor Thompson. Thanks for that. Other announcements, members of General Committee? Okay, seeing none. I have a number. First of all, as I'm sure everybody has heard by now, the province has decided that the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit is one of the health units that are allowed to reopen for phase 2 of the province's reopening as of Friday. That, of course, includes the city of Barrie. So the regional approach includes a number of health units, but not 10 health units largely in the GTA, also Windsor and a few other places, which can create some concerns and challenges, obviously, for some concerns for our residents. I'm sure you're hearing them already about people traveling into the area. At this point, I know our staff is still reviewing some of the details. There was some confusion even earlier. I indicated some information that pools, swimming pools, indoor, outdoor pools, whether those are all open or not. Some of this detail is still coming to us, and we are hoping to get much more information and then inform the public in the coming days as to how the reopening will work. Certainly that includes our own city services. I know there's a lot of people who probably wish a splash pad was open tomorrow for the heat emergency. Unfortunately, the splash pads can't just open tomorrow. Well, the province won't let us open them until Friday anyway, but it takes a little bit longer than overnight to get some of these things open. So just like we did 3 weeks ago, folks, there will be information coming now that the province has told us what the timelines are. We will be doing our best to have the city facilities that are affected opened, but it will be on the timeline that it's possible for us to safely open them, not necessarily all Friday morning. And I'm sure I'm also speaking for the business community. Some will be ready to go Friday, others will need a little more time. Each business owner will make that decision. But we will have more details to share. Please refer to the city's website, barrie.ca, and we will be providing that by way of communications once we've had more than a few hours to try and digest a substantial amount of information, to be frank, some of which was a bit of a surprise. So at least we got 4 days notice this time, and we will be trying to provide more information to the public in the coming days as to what can open and when. Rest assured, as the discussion we've just had, there will continue to be that education by our bylaw folks when it comes to the requirements of businesses for safe business practice and so forth going forward. A reminder that as of June 1st, the city has closed the section of Fairview Road near the Harvey Road Big Bay Point Bridge. That closure will affect Fairview from west of Bayview to just south of the En route service center and will be in effect for approximately 4 months to complete the bridge and complete the project, at which point we will have a lovely new bridge over Highway 400 and hopefully a little less pressure on Mapleview and Essa. The city has launched the Together at Home digital hub, providing a variety of recreational activities and resources. We continue to add content there for those who check back regularly. It continues to be added and updated regularly. That's at buildingbarrie.ca/Together at Home. And similarly for seniors, we have online via conference call and via internet. The Seniors Without Walls program is phone only, and that is for our seniors community to continue to have social connections and an opportunity for educational and social programming. The phone number there is 739-4223. Yes, unfortunately, so outdoor playground equipment, waterfront fitness equipment is not included. We have just received some clarification on that. I know that's going to be disappointing to people, but unfortunately the caution tape's not going to come off the playgrounds even on Friday. But do continue to watch us for more information on what is and is not usable in public parks. A reminder to keep your dogs on a leash, that is still required. And the parking at the Tiffin boat launch, another reminder, is only for vehicles with trailers. And as always, if you are thinking of organizing a charity event, a community event to support a local organization, and you want information on how to do that safely, please do call our enforcement services, 739-4241. Comments regarding the circulation lists, members of General Committee. Councillor Jim Harris.
Mayor Lehman, with your apologies, I did have one announcement I apologize I forgot to mention. Is that okay?
Go ahead, absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, Mayor Lehman and I attended a meeting last week with the Barrie Farmers Market. and heard a really good strategy for opening the in-person market. And I'm pleased to announce that the Operations Control Group approved the plan and that there will soon be a Barrie Farmers Market operating downtown behind City Hall. So just wanted to share that good news as far as those who like to go in person. I know they've had curbside pickup at the market, but we'll be able to enjoy the market with the social distancing and strategies in place to keep us all safe. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Harris. I know lots of people are looking forward to that, and notwithstanding great adaptation by many of the vendors to be able to do that curbside approach, it will be nice to be able to have that open air facility with the distancing in place. Any comments on the circulation list from June 1st, members of the General Committee? Okay, seeing none. June 8th? No. Okay. Seeing none, the public portion of tonight's agenda is concluded. We do have one item for the in-camera session. And so I will just conclude now the public portion of the meeting by asking for a motion to move into closed session to discuss this matter. Councillor Jim Harris, seconded by Councillor Kungle. All those in favor? Any opposed? None? That carries. We'll now move into closed session. Sorry, this is for a confidential acquisition of property matter on Ann Street.
Ryan, just let us know when the live stream's turned off.
Yep.